How much can one love someone? Enough to forgive betrayal? Enough to forget the dignity of a queen? For Juana of Castile, the answer was even more terrifying. She loved enough to refuse to accept death. For nearly 3 years, the legitimate queen of a vast empire had ordered her court to move in a never-ending funeral procession. She dragged the coffin containing the embalmed body of her dead husband, Philip the Handsome, across the frozen wastes of Spain. She accompanied him, slept in the same monastery, and on moonlit nights she ordered the coffin opened. She didn't just look. She kissed his cold, decaying feet and wept, begging him to wake. She was jealous even of the corpse. She absolutely forbade all women, especially beautiful nuns, to come near the coffin, for fear that even in death he might still be seduced by them. The world called her Juana la Loca, Crazy Juana. But this story is not simply about a woman driven mad by love. It is a tragedy far more complex. It is a story of the most brutal political betrayal in history, a conspiracy orchestrated by the 2 men she should have trusted most, her father and her son. They used her love, turned her extreme pain into a weapon against her. They needed her to be crazy, because if she were sane, they would have nothing. And this is how they destroyed her. Before she was the Mad One, she was Infanta Juana, the 3rd child of 2 of Spain's greatest monarchs, Isabella I of Castile and Ferdinand II of Aragon. These were the rulers who unified Spain, sponsored Christopher Columbus, and completed the Reconquista. Juana was not born to rule. That burden fell to her brother Juan and her sister Isabella. Juana instead was known for her melancholy beauty, her red blonde hair, and her sharp wit. She was fluent in languages and loved music and philosophy. But beneath that quiet exterior lay a fiery passion. She had intense emotions and extreme devotion, both in her religious beliefs and her personal feelings. Was so intense, according to the chronicles, that they could not wait. They asked the priest to perform the wedding ceremony right there, right then, so that they could legalize the marriage that very night. For Juana, this was a fairy tale. She was married to a king, and she fell madly in love with him. To Philip, she was simply a duty fulfilled. The drama began almost immediately. Juana was thrown into the Burgundian court, one of the most lavish, free, and dissolute in Europe. It was a stark contrast to her parents' austere, pious Spanish court. Here, courtship was a game, and fidelity was considered boring. Philip, who quickly fathered 2 children with Juana, Eleanor and Charles, the future emperor, returned to his true nature. He was an incurable womanizer. He openly pursued numerous mistresses, from court ladies to maids. And Juana, whose love was fierce and passionate, could not bear it. She was not a meek queen who would look the other way. Her love turned into a cruel jealousy, a burning obsession. This was the seed of her madness. But her madness may simply have been the reaction of a woman hurt, powerless in a foreign land. She began to scream. She wept inconsolably. She refused to eat. She would stand by the window for hours, waiting for her husband to return from his mistress's house. Philip did not respond with remorse. He responded with cruelty. He found her jealousy annoying and shameful. He began to punish her. He mocked her in court. He publicly humiliated her. And by many accounts, he abused her, both physically and mentally. He would lock her in his room, essentially imprisoning her for days at a time. An infamous incident occurred. Juana discovered that Philip was infatuated with a beautiful blonde noblewoman. In a fit of uncontrollable rage, Juana found her rival, attacked her, and cut off her golden hair with scissors. For Philip, this was the last straw. He beat Juana and locked her in a cell. This was the pattern that would. Philip's infidelity provoked Juana's hysterical reaction. Her reaction, instead of being understood, was labeled sick and insane. Philip, the pain giver, skillfully cast himself as the victim of a hysterical wife. He began spreading rumors that his wife was mentally unstable. While Juana is being emotionally tortured in her gilded cage in Flanders, back in Spain, fate is changing the game. A royal tragedy struck. Juana's brother, Prince Juan, heir to the throne, died suddenly. Soon after, her sister, Isabella, also died. Then Isabella's infant son, Miguel, next in line to the throne, also died. In just a few short years, everyone standing between Juana and the throne was gone. Suddenly, Juana, the abandoned, unstable wife, was no longer an obscure princess. She was the heiress of Castile. She was the most powerful woman in the world. And Philip, who had humiliated her, realized that the wife he despised now held the keys to an empire. Meanwhile, in Spain, her father, King Ferdinand, also realized something alarming. His power in Castile, which had belonged to his wife, Isabella, would now fall not to him, but to his daughter, and through his daughter, to his cunning Austrian son-in-law, Philip the Handsome. A brutal war for power is about to begin, and the only weapon, the only battlefield, is Juana's mind. Philip immediately changed tactics. He no longer shunned Juana. He took her and his court to Spain to claim his inheritance. Along the way, he tried to seduce her, to control her. But his goal was clear. He wanted to rule in her place. He continued to spread rumors of her instability to the Spanish nobles. In 1504, the great Queen Isabella died. In her will, she left the crown of Castile to her daughter, Juana. But there was a terrifying clause. Isabella, who had also heard the rumors from Philip, wrote that if Juana was unwilling or unable to rule, then her father, Ferdinand, would act as regent. That will sealed Juana's fate. It gave Juana's fate sealed. The two most powerful men in her life, her husband and her father, a legal reason to declare her insane. The game begins. Philip wants to remove Ferdinand to become king. Ferdinand wants to remove Philip to become regent. Both need to prove that Juana is unable to rule. Juana is caught in the middle, torn between a husband she loves dearly but cannot trust, and a father she respects but who is plotting against her. Her love for Philip is her greatest weakness, and both men know it. They began to isolate her. They appointed their own servants to take care of her, but in reality, to monitor and report any unusual behavior of hers. The situation came to a head. Philip and Ferdinand nearly caused a civil war. Finally, Ferdinand, seeing that the Castilian nobles supported Philip, the queen's legitimate husband, was forced to back down. He retreated to his kingdom of Aragon. Philip won. He defeated Ferdinand. He controlled Castile. He controlled Juana. He became King Philip I of Castile. His reign lasted a few months. In September 1506, in the city of Burgos, Philip the Handsome, 28 years old, healthy, had just played a game of bouncy ball, jeu de paume, and was sweating. He drank a glass of cold water. A few hours later, he was raging with fever. And within days, handsome Philip, Juana's charming demon, was dead. Juana's breakdown began immediately. Witnesses in the room said she did not cry. She just stood there, staring at his body, motionless, as if she could not understand. She would not allow the doctors to perform an autopsy. She would not allow funeral arrangements. She just sat in the dark room with his body for days, refusing to leave, refusing to eat. And her father, Ferdinand, upon hearing of his son-in-law's death, saw his opportunity. He began to act to regain power. But Juana, paralyzed by grief, did something no one expected. She refused to bury him. She declared that she would personally take his body to Granada, where her parents were buried. And so, on a cold winter night, Queen Juana, pregnant with Philip's sixth child, ordered his coffin removed from the convent. She began a journey that would go down in history as one of the most bizarre acts of a reigning monarch. A journey of madness, or a queen's last-ditch effort to protect the only thing she had left, the body of the man who destroyed her? One December night in 1506, the coffin of Philip the Handsome, wrapped in silk and lead, was carried out of the gates of the Miraflores convent in Burgos. Queen Juana, 27 years old, 7 months pregnant, dressed in black mourning, gave the order for the procession to depart. This is not a funeral. This is an escape from reality. Juana established strange and macabre rules. The procession was only allowed to move at night. A widow, she declared, who has lost the light of her life should not see the light of day. Her logic, though warped, was tragically poetic. Her ghostly procession, comprised of nobles, torch-bearing priests, armed guards, and a coffin, became a terrifying sight crawling through the Castilian countryside in the dead of winter. They didn't go straight to Granada. They wandered. Every few nights they stopped at a monastery, and at each stop, Juana ordered a ritual to be performed. She asked that the coffin be placed within her sight. She would attend the prayers for his soul. And then, when the priests had left, she would command, "Open it." Despite the protests of onlookers, the lead-lined coffin would be opened. Juana, carrying a candle, would approach her husband's embalmed body alone. Historians record that she showed no revulsion at the stench of decomposition, which the crude embalming could not completely conceal. She would stare at his face, once handsome, now ashen and shriveled. And then she would bend down, lift up his cold feet, and kiss them. This act, repeated over and over again, sowed terror and fueled rumors. This was no longer grief. It was blasphemy. Jealousy did not die with Philip. It only grew stronger. She was haunted by the thought that another woman might seduce him, even in his corpse. She ordered armed guards to patrol the coffin 24/7, and she issued an absolute ban. No woman was allowed near the coffin. The frenzy reached its peak at a convent in Torquemada. After a tiring night's journey, the procession stopped at a large convent to rest. Juana settled into her room with the coffin as usual. But as dawn broke, she heard singing. It was a woman singing. She realized she had spent the night in a nunnery. A rage erupted. She screamed, accusing the nuns of being whores, of being there to tempt her husband. She believed this was a trap set by her rivals. In a fit of rage, she ran outside into the snowstorm and ordered the coffin to be removed from the convent immediately. Horrified attendants were forced to carry the coffin outside and leave it alone in the snowy field. Juana, heavily pregnant, sat beside the coffin all night, shivering in the cold, guarding her husband from the invisible nuns. When news of this behavior spread, it was no longer a rumor. It was proof. The queen had completely lost her mind. In the midst of this ghostly journey, in January 1507, in a small village, Juana went into labor. She gave birth to her sixth and final child, a girl. She named the child Catalina, or Catherine of Austria, who would later become Queen of Portugal. The birth of a child did not interrupt her obsession. Just weeks after giving birth, she continued. Now the bizarre procession had a new member, a crying infant, dragged along with its mother on a pilgrimage to the afterlife. While the Queen of Castile wanders the snowy fields, kissing a corpse and banning nuns from approaching, a cruel political chess game is taking place. Her father, King Ferdinand of Aragon, had watched everything from afar with cold calculation. Philip's death was not a tragedy for him. It was a golden opportunity. The only enemy standing in his way of gaining control of Castile, a kingdom far richer and more powerful than his own Aragon, was gone. All he needed to do was prove the clause in his wife, Queen Isabella's will, that Juana was unable to rule. And Juana, by her actions, was personally giving him all the proof he needed. Ferdinand didn't need to lie. He just had to tell the truth. Juana's every move, every kiss on the corpse, every fit of jealousy, every nighttime move was carefully recorded by Ferdinand's spies and reported to the noble councils and bishops. Look, his message was clear. Look at your queen. She cannot rule a house, let alone a kingdom. Castile needs a firm hand. Castile needs me. In the summer of 1507, Ferdinand returned to Castile. He did not come as an invader. He came as a savior, a grieving father come to care for his sick daughter. The meeting between father and daughter is a masterpiece of psychological manipulation. Ferdinand finds Juana and her procession in a remote village. He does not confront her. He hugs her. He cries with her. He looks at Philip's coffin and expresses his false grief. He told her she was right to protect her husband. He said he understood her pain. And then he gently made a suggestion. "My daughter," he might have said, "you are tired. Baby Catalina needs a home. And Philip, he needs rest too. There is a place, a quiet, sacred place, the royal convent of Santa Clara in Tordesillas. You can stay there. You can keep his coffin with you. You can watch over him forever." Juana, physically exhausted from childbirth, mentally exhausted from months of grief and sleeplessness, saw a way out. She did not hear the prison doors closing. She heard the promise of sanctuary. She accepted. It was Ferdinand's last and most brutal move. Tordesillas was not a palace. It was a fortress monastery, perched on a steep hill overlooking the Duero River. Its walls were high and thick. It was the perfect prison. In 1509, Juana, the legitimate queen of Castile and Aragon, entered the Santa Clara convent. She was accompanied by her youngest daughter, Catalina. Philip's coffin was placed in a chapel next to the convent, within view from her window. She thought this was a temporary shelter. As soon as she got inside, the trap fell. Ferdinand acted quickly. He ordered her procession to be dispersed. Juana's last loyal female attendants, who had accompanied her from Flanders, were dismissed and sent elsewhere. Instead, Ferdinand appointed a new group of caretakers. These were not servants. They were guards. At their head was Louis Ferrer, a nobleman known for his absolute loyalty to Ferdinand and his ruthlessness. Ferrer was given clear instructions. Juana was to be completely isolated. She was not to receive letters. She was not to send letters. She was not to receive any visitors without Ferdinand's express permission. She was not to be informed about political matters. She was to be erased from the world. And to ensure her obedience, Ferrer was allowed to use force. If the queen acted up, he was allowed to tie her up. Juana la Loca was now a virtual prisoner, locked away in a remote convent, stripped of all power and all contact. Her only possessions were her young daughter Catalina, who had also been made a prisoner with her, and the corpse of her husband lying in a church she could only see through a barred window. Ferdinand was officially recognized by the Council of Castile as the sole and absolute regent of the kingdom in the name of his absent queen. He got what he wanted. He usurped the throne of his own daughter without firing a shot, simply by exploiting her love and grief. Juana would live in this cage. Every day she would wake up, look out the window, and stare at the church where Philip was buried. She had kept her promise. She would watch over him. She remained there in the shadow of Tordesillas for 7 years, until news shook her prison. In 1516, Ferdinand, the father who had imprisoned her, died. For a brief moment, Juana may have felt hope. She was free. Her father was dead. Now her co-ruler was her eldest son, Charles, whom she had not seen in years. A 16-year-old boy, Charles, raised in Flanders, is now king of Spain. He will come. He will free his mother. He will restore her to her throne. Juana waited for her savior. Little did she know that the son she was expecting would be even more cruel than the father she had just buried. Her captivity, in fact, had only just begun. The death of King Ferdinand in 1516 was supposed to be the key to Juana's liberation. The father who had imprisoned her, who had falsely accused her of madness, was no more. By law, she was no longer the absentee queen under a regency. She was the sole queen of Castile and Aragon, the legitimate ruler of a budding Spanish empire that was about to engulf the New World. Inside the walls of the Tordesillas fortress convent, the mood changed. The jailers, led by Luis Ferrer, began to worry. Their master was dead. Would the queen they had mistreated, isolated, and humiliated for the past 7 years be freed and regain power? If so, her revenge would surely be terrible. Juana, now 36, waited. 7 years of captivity, with her young daughter Catalina as her only companion, had left her gaunt, depressed, and paranoid. She frequently refused to bathe, wore ragged clothes, and screamed at night. To her jailers, this was evidence that she was truly insane. But to an objective observer, it would have been the perfectly understandable reaction of a traumatized person, unjustly imprisoned and deprived of everything. Her only hope now rested on one name, Charles, or rather Carlos, King Charles I of Spain. This was her eldest son, born in Flanders, whom she had not seen in over a decade. She remembered him as a boy. Now he was a 17-year-old king. He was her co-ruler. Surely a son would not treat his mother the way a cruel father had. He would come. He would see the truth. He would free her. In the fall of 1517, Charles finally arrived in Spain. He did not come alone. He came with a huge entourage of Flemish, Dutch, Belgian nobles and advisors. He did not speak a word of Spanish. He did not understand Spanish culture. He saw the country he had just inherited not as a homeland, but as a foreign treasury to finance his European ambitions. What is Charles's top priority? Not rescuing his mother, but legitimizing his power. The Cortes of Castile were clear. Charles was not technically a king. He was only co-ruler with his mother, Juana, the legitimate queen. To rule, he needed her permission. And so Charles made the trip to Tordesillas. It was one of the most tragic reunions in royal history. Picture the scene. The young king, 17 years old, cold, pragmatic, raised in the luxury of the Burgundian court, enters a dark, cold, smelly room in a remote monastery. There he sees his mother. Juana is no queen. She is thin, her hair is disheveled, and she wears worn clothes. With her is Charles' younger sister, Catalina, a wild 10-year-old girl, raised as a prisoner and knowing nothing of the outside world. The encounter was awkward, but most importantly, Juana was sober. She recognized her son at once. She hugged him. She spoke to him in perfect clarity. She did not speak of kissing her husband's body. She spoke of her imprisonment. She pointed to the jailers and denounced them. These men have mistreated me. They have disobeyed my orders. They have hindered me. For Charles, this was a defining moment. His mother was not an uncommunicative madwoman. She was a damaged, melancholy, but clearly rational woman. The 17-year-old king stood at a crossroads. Choice 1. He could do the right thing. Free his mother, bring her back to court, treat her like a queen, and rule alongside her as her son and heir. Option 2. He could do as his grandfather, Ferdinand, did. Declare her incompetent, keep her locked up, and rule in her stead. Option 1 is risky. An unanticipated rebellion could arise. He could have to give up all his power. Option 2 sounds safe. He could rule as himself, alone and permanently. Which would he choose?
Emotional, possibly unstable, mother holding real power could challenge his decisions. Option 2 gives him absolute control. Charles, who would later become Emperor Charles V, one of Europe's most ruthless, pragmatic politicians, did not hesitate for a second. He chose option 2. After the meeting, he officially confirmed all of his grandfather's orders. Luis Ferrer was dismissed, not for mistreating Juana, but for not being tough enough. Charles appointed a new jailer, the Marquis de Denia, a man with a reputation for cruelty and complete loyalty to Charles. Charles wrote Denia clear instructions. No one is to speak to the Queen on any business or political matter. She is not to receive any letters. If she shows any resistance, you are authorized to use corporal punishment. Her son just ordered the legalization of his mother's torture. What's more, he's begun the process of breaking his sister Catalina out of prison and selling her off to the King of Portugal. He's
depriving Juana of her only companion. The betrayal was even more cruel than Ferdinand's, because this was not a political opponent. This was her own flesh and blood. The son she had hoped would save her had now become her jailer. But the story wasn't over yet. Fate gave Juana one last chance, a brief dramatic window to change everything. In 1520, Spain exploded. The people of Castile could not stand their new foreign king. Charles used Spanish money to bribe German voters and elect himself Holy Roman Emperor. He despised the lords, appointed Flemings to the highest positions, and taxed the people to the bone. A full-scale uprising broke out. It was called the Revolt of the Comuneros, urban people. And the Comuneros had one goal, to overthrow Charles's rule and restore their rightful queen. They did not believe Juana was crazy. They believed she was a victim, like them. In the summer of 1520, a rebel army led by the brave nobleman Juan de Padilla marched to Tordesillas. They fought. Charles's garrison overwhelmed the Marquis de Denia's guards and stormed the monastery. They found their queen in a dark, dirty room. The revolutionary leaders, tough, practical men, knelt before this haggard, ragged woman. "Your Majesty," Padilla said, "we are your loyal subjects. We have come to free you from the captivity of your son, the Fleming tyrant. Rise, Your Majesty, rule us. Sign this document declaring your authority, and we will die for you." This was that moment, the greatest, most mysterious moment of Juana's life. All Spain held its breath. Everything depended on her. Was she crazy? No. The Comuneros leaders had been with her for weeks, and they all reported that she was completely sane. She spoke intelligently. She understood the political situation. She knew Charles was in Germany. She knew about taxes. She knew who they were. They had freed her. The prison was open. All she had to do was say yes. Just one signature. She would regain her throne, avenge her father and son, and change the history of Europe. And what did Juana do? She did nothing. This was the final tragedy, the most difficult puzzle. Juana spoke to the leaders. She sympathized with them. She thanked them for rescuing her. But she refused to sign anything. They begged her. They knelt. They explained that without her signature, their uprising would be illegal. They needed her. Juana kept delaying. She said, "I will think." She said, "I can't." And finally, she spoke the fateful words, "I will never act against my son." Even when betrayed, tortured, and imprisoned by her own son, a mother's sick love, or perhaps a twisted sense of royal loyalty, prevented her from doing the only thing that could save herself. She, the one accused of being mad, was the only one acting on a moral principle, no matter how self-destructive that principle was. Her hesitation was a death sentence for the uprising. It bought Charles and his advisors precious time. The royal army, funded by high-ranking nobles who feared a peasant revolution, rallied. Without Juana's official mandate, the Comuneros movement lost its legitimacy. They were divided and disoriented. In 1521, at the Battle of Villalar, the royal army crushed the Comuneros. Juan de Padilla and other leaders were captured and beheaded. The uprising failed. Charles's army returned to Tordesillas. This time, there was no pretense. The prison doors the Comuneros had opened were now slammed shut, locked, and sealed forever. Charles, now Emperor Charles V, realized an even more terrifying truth. His mother was not crazy, which meant she would always be a threat. She had the chance to overthrow him, and she didn't. But he would never give her a second chance. Juana's imprisonment was no longer a protective measure. It was a punishment. The Marquis de Denia was given full power. Juana was thrown back into the shadows. But this time, the shadows were deeper. Her daughter Catalina, her only companion, was taken away in 1525 to marry the King of Portugal. Juana la Loca was now all alone, forgotten by the world, betrayed by the son she had rejected, condemned to spend the rest of her life in a dark room in Tordesillas. The final phase of her life, a 3-decade-long life after death, had begun. The Battle of Villalar not only ended the Comuneros' rebellion, it ended Juana's life. After her son's army recaptured Tordesillas, all pretense of protecting the queen was gone. The Marquis de Denia, Charles V's loyal jailer, now ruled Juana's life with an undisguised iron fist. He was more than a jailer, he was a torturer. Juana, the woman who could have reclaimed her crown with just a signature, the woman who chose the loyalty of a mother over the power of a queen, now faces the consequences of that tragic choice. Her imprisonment enters its most brutal phase. The Marquis de Denia blamed Juana for the uprising. He believed that his own, though slight, softness had allowed the rebels to get to her. He was determined never to repeat that mistake. He saw her not as a queen, but as a dangerous rebel, a mad woman who needed to be subdued. First, he enforced absolute isolation. Juana's already limited windows were now nearly boarded up. She was kept in near-permanent darkness, a classic psychological torture tactic. She was not allowed to roam the convent grounds. She was confined to 2 filthy, smelly rooms. The persecution which Ferdinand began, Charles now perfected. In 1525, the final blow was inflicted. Her son, Emperor Charles V, whom she had refused to betray, ordered Juana's 18-year-old daughter Catalina removed from Tordesillas. Catalina was Juana's only companion, born in a ghostly funeral procession, raised as a prisoner alongside her mother. She was Juana's last link to reality, to human love. Charles did not give Catalina away out of pity. He sold her to the King of Portugal. She was another political pawn. Witnesses recorded a heartbreaking scene of separation. Fought, screamed, clung to her daughter. She accused Denia and her son of stealing her last child. But she was helpless. Catalina was dragged away, leaving Juana alone in the darkness, completely alone for the first time in 18 years. That loneliness lasted 30 years. The next 30 years of Juana's life were a macabre void. She was a living ghost, erased from the history being written by her own son. While Emperor Charles V ruled an empire on which the sun never sets, stretching from Peru to the Philippines, his mother, the legitimate Queen of Spain, rotted in a dark room in Tordesillas. Charles, the son she had protected, never visited her again. The Marquis de Denia now had complete control. He documented Juana's behavior in reports to Charles, which served one purpose: to prove that she was still mad and to justify his brutal treatment. He wrote that the queen refused to bathe, that she wore rags, that she screamed at night, that she refused to eat. But he missed the context. She refused to bathe because she feared the servants would poison the bathwater. She screamed because she heard torture. She refused to eat because she believed Denia was trying to kill her. Was this the behavior of a madman, or the understandable paranoid reaction of a prisoner who had suffered decades of psychological torture? Denia did not stop at psychological torture. There is clear evidence in his letters that he used physical torture as well. When Juana refused to comply with an order, Denia used a method called la cuerda, the rope. This was a common form of torture during the Spanish Inquisition, in which the victim's hands were tied behind their back and suspended by a rope, causing excruciating pain to the shoulders and joints. Imagine this. The legitimate Queen of Spain is being hanged as a heretic in her own prison by order of a jailer and with the tacit approval of her own son, the Holy Roman Emperor. The cruelty is immeasurable. Her original obsession? Handsome. Philip's coffin was now beyond her control. The coffin was sealed forever in the church. She could no longer open it. She could no longer kiss his cold feet. The focus on his death had faded, replaced by the vivid reality of her own imprisonment. As her body grew old in darkness, her mind began to seek other escapes. She developed a fierce devotion, but it was as strange and rebellious as everything else in her life. She began to believe that she could communicate directly with God, that she did not need priests. This, in the eyes of her captors, was more dangerous than madness. It was heresy. In her final years, Juana's health rapidly deteriorated. She became paralyzed. She was confined to her bed in her dark, smelly room. And she began to perform one last and most mysterious act of rebellion. She refused to go to confession. She refused to attend Mass. She refused to receive the last sacraments. For a 16th century Spaniard, especially a member of the most devout Catholic royal family, this was an unthinkable act. It meant she was voluntarily condemning her soul to eternal hell. The news shocked Charles V, who was old and tired of power. He was not worried about his mother's soul. He was worried about his family's reputation. What if the Queen of Spain, the emperor's mother, died as a heretic, an atheist? It would be a scandal that would destroy the dynasty. He sent a famous Jesuit priest, Francisco de Borja, later a saint, to Tordesillas with a single mission: to force Juana to confess. The confrontation between the eloquent priest and the dying queen is one of the final and strangest chapters. Borja has tried everything. He begs, he threatens hellfire, he promises paradise. But Juana, a woman who had been silent for so long, found her voice in the silence. She refused. Why? This is the final riddle of Juana la Loca. Had she, after decades of imprisonment, truly lost her faith? Had she concluded that no merciful God could allow the injustices she had suffered? Or is this the final, sharpest act of defiance from a still intelligent mind? Is she saying, "You have taken my crown, you have taken my children, you have taken my freedom. You will not take my soul. I will not participate in your hypocritical drama. I will not accept forgiveness from a church that has been complicit in my imprisonment"? We will never know for sure. But Francisco de Borgia left Tordesillas in defeat and shaken, telling the emperor that he would rather face an army of demons than try to persuade the queen again. On April 12, 1555, Good Friday, a highly symbolic day of suffering and sacrifice, Juana of Castile died. She is 75 years old. She has been imprisoned for 46 years. She died alone, in a filthy room, abandoned by all those she had ever loved. The final irony of history is astonishing. Just months after the death of the mother he had imprisoned all his life, Emperor Charles V, the most powerful man in the world, did the unthinkable. He announced his
Abdication. Tired, sick, and perhaps haunted by his sins, he renounced all titles and power and retired to live out his last days in a monastery in Yuste, Spain. The son who locked his mother in a convent for 46 years eventually condemned himself to the same fate. In the end, history leaves us with the biggest question of all, the one that can never be fully answered. Was Juana crazy? Maybe. She certainly had unstable behavior, a pathological jealousy, and an obsession with death. But her madness did not exist in a vacuum. It was born of betrayed love. It was nurtured by her husband's cruelty. It was weaponized by her father's greed. And it was chained forever by her son's cruelty. All the powerful men in her life needed her to be crazy to justify their depredations. They built a cage around her, labeled it crazy, and then acted shocked when she started acting like a trapped prisoner. Perhaps Juana was not born crazy. Perhaps she was driven crazy. Or perhaps more
terrifyingly, she was completely sane, a woman trapped in a nightmare from which she could not awaken, forced to watch her life stolen by the very people she loved most. She was not Juana la Loca, she was Juana la Prisionera, Juana the prisoner.